Yesterday, we had a interesting discussion about how you know today's daf. Sorry, is in Kiddushin is daf Membet 42. We are, I think, at the last like few lines on Mem Aleph Amud Bet, so 3 lines from the bottom. But just to give the background again, so yesterday we discussed the fundamental question from our Mishnah, which is how do you know that you can appoint a shliach? How do you can appoint a messenger to do something for you? And as I mentioned yesterday, it goes beyond just having someone, telling them exactly what to do, but you can actually give them agency. You can say, you can choose my wife or my husband for me, depending on which way. We discouraged one way, as you discussed yesterday. But you could say about many things. Go take truma for me as an example. Go do a carbon pesach for me, right? You give the person the ability to choose the animal, to choose the time. So how do we know that? We talked yesterday about all these proofs. So one of the proofs was from Carbon Pesach, because the pasuk by Carbon Pesach said that you shachtu oto kol kahal adat Yisrael, right? You shechted all of the people. Now, what does that mean, all the people? Obviously, you can't have all the people shechting. It must be that someone can shecht for other people. So says the Gemara today, now we are 4 lines in the bottom. Hanicha the Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. That makes sense, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, who reads that pasuk to teach you that by a carbon pesach you can appoint a shliach. El Rabbi Yochanan, the mapik leila haikra the drash shachin, according to Rabbi Yonatan, sorry, according to Rabbi Yonatan uses this pasuk for something else. Then you don't have a source to tell you that you can make a shliach. Minala. Now to Tanya, what's this machloket? This is a braita im Sechet Psachim. Rabbi Yonatan Omer. Says Rabbi Yonatan, Minayin shekol Yisrael kulan yotzim bepesach echad. How do you know that in theory, all of Bnei Yisrael could theoretically rely on one carbon pesach? What does that mean? That let's say you're super impoverished, right? Or you have a small group of people. You can, in fact, make a carbon pesach and say it's for everybody, excuse me, even if there won't be a kizayit for each person to eat. Even if each person will get, you'll make not that you can make a stew from it, but you would take a small piece and give each person a tiny piece, much less than a kazayit, because, unfortunately, they didn't have enough money. You couldn't afford more. So how do you know that's okay? That you don't actually need a minimum size of meat for each person to count on the carbon pesach? Says Rabbi Yonatan Shnemer, it's based on this verse. It says on the top line of Membet Amid Aleph, V'shachatu oto kol kahal adat Yisrael bein harabayim. Then all of the people shechted. You can't have everyone coming to shechted. You have one representative. So that's how you see that everyone basically can bring one carbon pesach. Again, in theory. Rabbi Yonatan learns from this that you don't need a kazayit. And so you can, obviously it's better if you have it, but if you were poor, difficult times, you couldn't find a lot of lambs in that time, you can rely on one, the way they would have like one esrog maybe for the whole community kind of thing. You could do a similar thing for carbon pesach. And Rashi points out it's because it's really the zrika that's ma'akev. Interesting. We think of carbon pesach as eating it, and it's important to eat it if you have it. But the most important thing is actually bringing it. And so since you bring it on for all these people, that would be enough. But if that's what you use the verse for, the pasuk for, how do you know, asked the Gemara, 5th line, B'kadshim minale. So how does he know? How do you know that by kachim you can do a shliach? Says the Gemara. Well, it's obvious, right? It's true you don't have an extra pasuk, right? But if you have one person shechting Kar Pesach for all of Bnei Yisrael, clearly he's a shliach, right? So minei answers the Gemara. That you learn from it. Meaning from the fact that one person can shech for everyone, you don't have each individual has to bring their own carbon pesach, means you can have a shliach. That's where, well, that's true that you can learn from there that you can make a messenger. But maybe that's different because you are actually partners. So maybe it's easier to make a messenger when you're doing it together, right? You're both eating the carbon pesach together. This one can do it for you. But if I go to a person and say, can you bring a carbon for me? When he or she has no chelik in that carbon, how do you can make a messenger, a shliach, even if you have no partnership with them, even if they're not in it with you, right? So how do you know? Says Mar, you're right. El Mihacha, there's a whole nother pasuk which we learn it from, which is in the same context of carbon pesach, where it says, "Vayikhu lahem ish," each person would take celebrate the vote, celebrate one set for their I don't know you translate beit avot, their family compound, one set for the house, meaning clearly it was not meant to be a one-to-one relationship where each person brought a set. You brought a person, a balabayit would bring a set for their clan, right? So clearly you can have shutfut. You can have, sorry, shliach. I gave it away. Well, that also is the same answer. Dilma hatam nami. Maybe they're two. It's because they're all in it together, meaning you're bringing it for your family so you can be a shliach for them. But how do you know you can do it if you're not part of that group? This is where, well, that's then if it's two psukim that tell you the exact same thing. In Cain, Trey Kroy Lamali. Why would you need two psukim? One to tell you shachdu oto kol kahal dat Yisrael, that one person can do it for, can have one carbon for all of Bnei Yisrael, and one to tell you that one person does it with the whole family. It must be that one is to tell you shutafut, and the second one is if it's not necessary where they are connected, then you can in fact use it for a place where they are not connected to tell you that you can have a shliach for a karban, even if you have no connection to the shliach, you don't have any kind of partnership. You just go over to the person and say, "Do me a favor," or you could pay them, of course, and do this for me. Bring a karban on my behalf. Says the Gemara, that's very nice if that's what the pasuk ish celebate avot is telling you. But there's another limud, mibaylek Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak already used this pasuk to tell you something else. Rabbi Yitzchak, this was all Gemara we have in Psachim a long time ago. Rabbi Yitzchak used it from this pasuk to tell you, Dam Rabbi Yitzchak, ish tells you that ish zocheh la katan zocheh, right? That a man, meaning an adult, as opposed to a minor, not necessarily opposed to a woman, but an ish as opposed to a minor, is zocheh, meaning that they can make a kinyan for somebody else. But a katan cannot be zocheh, meaning katan does not have the ability to acquire something for somebody else, right? Or maybe for themselves too. We'll discuss that actually more today, but it's certainly not for somebody else. And that's what the word ish tells you. Well, there's another ish. The ish is ish lefi achlo nafka. There we use the word ish lefi achlo, which is actually just after that in the pasuk. Again, it uses an extra word ish. I didn't say lefi achlo, telling you that only an ish can be one who acquires it. So you have an extra pasuk, and that's how you learn out shliach. Well, still we need the pasuk ish to tell you that you can shech the karban pesach even for one person. Or you might have thought the opposite. Forget about shechting it for a lot of people. You might have thought, let's say you're by yourself, right? You found no friends, so no one's in your chabura, sadly, right? Rosa would be your friend, but you're all by yourself. You are the last man standing, and you have one more karban. You might think that you're not allowed to actually bring a karban pesach for yourself because there's no way a person can eat a karban pesach, right? And if you do, that's disgusting. That's not considered eating. One man or one woman to eat an entire animal. So you might have thought that, I guess people could do it today, but it was thought to be achila gasa, right? It's crazy. So you might have thought you don't even bring the karban pesach. It says in Gemara that in fact there's an opinion that from the pasuk of ish lefi achlo that an individual can eat the whole thing. That's how we darshan it. So you use the pasuk to tell you that you can be shochtin at the pesach ala yachid. Well, you're right. Savar Allah, we have to now, if you have this opinion, be kimanda amar ein shochatin at the pesach. You have to come out that way, that you don't use the pasuk because you're not allowed to shech the karban pesach for one individual, and therefore the pasuk ish lefi achlo is extra. And through all the limudim we just had, it ultimately comes to tell you that you can make a shliach to do a carbon for you. So now
wouldn't eating an entire karban pesach yourself violate the isser of being a glutton?
Yeah, so 100%. It would not only would violate, we don't consider it eating it. But I guess first of all, it could be a very small animal, but you eat what you eat and you don't eat what you don't eat. You get rid of what you don't. I think part of the question is, what if you have no alternative, right? Should you bring it and throw away or not, right? So anyways, it's a discussion we had in
Well, if you have in mind that you're not going to eat the whole thing in time, that makes it pigul.
No, pigul's only if you think you're going to eat it out of the time, right? Meaning if you plan to eat it tomorrow, that's pigul, right? But if you don't plan to eat it, you say, I have this animal, I'll eat what I can. When I'm stuffed, I'll stop eating, which is what you should do. You throw away, you got to burn what you don't eat. But that would be the case. So that is how we know shlucho shel adam kimoto. That's so far. Says the Gemara today, we've got a whole new proof, a whole new case where we learn shlicho shel adam kemoto, and it's a very interesting case. It says the Gemara, "Velahad Amar Rav Gido Amar Rav." Rav Gido was quoted in the name of Rav as saying a whole different source. Minayin sheshlucho shel adam kemoto. How do you know that a shliach is like you? And so the source here is, fascinatingly, Shenemar. It says this is at the end of end of Sefer Bamidbar. Right, when they're talking about dividing up the land of Israel, it says that they choose nasi echad mimateh to pass out the land. Right, you take one nasi from each tribe, so the head of the tribe, who determines the Yerusha in Eretz Yisrael. Right, so clearly, if it's one nasi, that person is a shliach for all of the people because they assign ownership and land in Eretz Yisrael for every individual in their tribe. So the fact that the Torah specifically talks about the nasi doing it, not each individual coming up and getting their portion, it means that you can have a shliach that divides things for all people. So says the Gemara, well, why do you know all these other psukim? If a nasi can do this for everybody, then this should be our source that you can have shlichut, that one person, a nasi in this case, can be a messenger and acquire the land and pass it out for all the people. You think that works because of shlichut? Right? Obviously, included in the passing out of the land is land that's given to minors. Right? Let's say their father's not alive or whatever it is. Remember when they went to Eretz Yisrael, everyone got a chelik in the nachala. And so there's no shlichut to a minor. You can't do something on behalf of a minor who cannot appoint you to be a shliach, right? So since a minor cannot appoint you to be a shliach, clearly the nasi is not acting in the form of a shliach. So what is the nasi doing? Alakihad Rava Barafuna. Amar Rava Barafuna, Amar Gido Amar Rav. This is a new category. This is not the same as a shlichut where you do something for somebody else. This is a concept which you've had many times before of zechiyah. Zechiyah means you give a benefit to somebody else, right? And giving a benefit to somebody else happens through shlichut, but it's beyond shlichut, right? It's another level, basically, where you're doing something that is a pure positive for that person. And we have a principle that we've learned many times before, that you can be zachin la'adam shalom b'fanav. You can do something good for somebody even if they don't know about it, right? So if someone comes over to me and says, I want to give a gift to Charlie of $10,000, will you accept it for him? I can accept that gift on your behalf, assuming that's a positive, I guess. I can accept that gift on your behalf without you knowing about it. And it counts. And the second I accept it, it's yours, right? And the giver can't change their mind. I can't keep it, etc. So the way that a nasi gives things over to the people is not through shlichut, it's through zechiyah. Now, of course, I'm glossing over some very complex issues because the question is how, of course, does zechiyah work? Right? We've discussed this before, and we've considered the possibility. There's a big machlok in Rashi and Tosafot about this. We've considered the possibility that zechiyah shalom b'fanav means that you can make a shliach without a person knowing you make the shliach, because they for sure want you to be their messenger to get that $10,000. But according to this Gemara, it seems like that's not the case, right? Because we're saying that a person cannot give a land to a minor as a shliach. A minor cannot appoint the nasi and say, be my messenger, because they have no agency to give over power for themselves, right? But you can still give a gift to a minor. So clearly a minor can acquire something through zechiyah, even if they can't appoint a shliach, right? A lot of debate as to how that would happen. But that's exactly what we're talking about. So it's not a shlichut that the nasi is doing. It is a concept of zechiyah. The nasi is getting land for the people, which is a pure positive, and therefore that's how the nasi can give over land through agency, basically. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make any sense, because think about it. Is getting land always positive, right? So how Tizbara asked the Gemara, right? Did I read all these words? I don't know. Says wherever Tizbara, is that true? Zechutu hachova nami ika, right? Not every time that the Nasi said this piece of land goes to Ruvain, this piece goes to Shimon, not everybody was happy with their land, right? It's impossible that everybody thought that they got the best land. There were probably plenty of people who were like, why did my brother or my uncle get the place near the river? I want the place near the river. I got this rocky, etc. It doesn't matter. It can't always be a zchut. Sometimes people are not going to be happy with their land choice, right? Meaning, there might be some people who don't want to be in the mountain. They hate climbing the steps, and they that they like the mountains, and they don't like the steps, and some the opposite. Meaning there's and the Gemara is pointing out there's no universally good land, right? Land, as we all know, real estate and property and things like that are subjective. And since it's subjective, it's impossible. You could say that the Nasi was perfect and he divined what every person wanted, right? But there were also limitations on what they had, right? They didn't have infinite land in the land of Israel. There was certain portions that had to be passed out. So some people are going to be unhappy with their Yerusha, right? So how can you use the concept of Zechiyah, which requires a complete positive, if sometimes it's going to be negative? Ella, this that we relied on to give out land to the miners is based on the principle of Rava Bar Rafuna. The Amar Rava Bar Rafuna, Amar Rav Gidol, Amar Rav, Minayin liyatomim shebo lachluk b'nichsei avihem. How do you know? Think about this challenge, right? A person dies and they leave over their estates to, let's say, 3 orphans, but they're all minors, right? So we already said that it's really challenging because a minor cannot make a shliach, right? So they can't appoint someone to be their agent to get it for them. So how in the world would they ever split up the land and say this land goes to, kid 1, kid 2, kid 3, if they have no agency? So said Rav Gidol Amarav that yitomim who come lachlok b'nichsei avihem, what happens is shebeit din mamidim lahem apotropos, that Beit Din, in fact, can assign a apotropos. How do we translate apotropos? It's like a executor, I would say. It's probably one way, or like an agent, essentially. What do they call a probate kind of thing? I don't know if that's what probate means, but they assign an apotropos, right? A person looking out for their interests, and that apotropos can be lechov ulizakot. He can damage them and he can do good for them. He can give them a bad portion and a good portion. So what do you mean a bad portion? Lechov amai. Why would we give someone the ability to do something negative to these poor yitomim? Ella, what it means is not that negative. It means lechuv amanat liskot. You can do negative in order to do advantage, right? Meaning you can do something that is temporarily negative because ultimately it's going to be advantageous, right? So whatever it might be, let's say the Yitomim want to sell the land tomorrow and buy candy, right? You can stop them from doing that because you're going to get a better deal in the future, or you can sell one portion because it'll make the other portion more valuable or something like that, right? So the apotropos has the ability to do that. Now, how in the world can you do that? The apotropos cannot be appointed by the Yitomim because they can't apply an agent. The man who died is dead, right? He can't appoint anybody anymore. So how in the world can you get an apotropos? Says the Gemara, the source of this, says Rav Gidol Marav, is actually this pasuk, where it says, that you can appoint, you can have a nasi or Yerusha who can represent even minors who have no ability to make that person their representative. But this basically concludes what we learn from that pasuk of Nasi Echad. It doesn't tell you that you can make a messenger for anybody. It's telling you a very narrow halacha that in specific cases where you're passing out land, and you're doing Yerusha, that you can rely on one agent or one Nasi for all the people. And so therefore we can't really use that to generalize about the question of Shlucho Shel Adam Kimoto. Okay, we're up to the 2 dots. I point out, of course, these are very practical Gemarot because these questions come up all the time when people die or passing out or having disputes. Right? We rely, I guess, on secular courts, but had in theory, or if still today, a person wants to go according to Beit Din, these become very, very relevant questions in Yerusha, especially. We're going to have many more of them today. Says Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, at the 2 dots, around 10 lines from the bottom of Membet Amud Aleph. Says Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Yitomim sheba'u lachlok b'nichsei avihem. Right? This is the scenario that we set up. You have a person dies, all of their children, not doesn't have to be all of them, because it could even be some of them, right? That Yitomim come and they set up they come to split up the nechasim of their father, right? So then Beit Din is mamidim lahem apotropos. Beit Din assigns for them an apotropis.
Yeah, so a better word is actually guardian, I
Okay,
think.
guardian. I agree with you. That is a
Okay.
better word.
It just
Correct.
came to mind, so.
Yeah, so a guardian, correct, but guardian which has a lot of responsibility, but it's true because the apotropis, of course, has to act in their best interest, right? That's the principle. Obororim lahen chilik yafe, right? The apotropis, so the gears here is a little changed because this is actually in the past tense, right? They set up a apotropis, so you keep changing. Instead of saying sheba'u, it said the gra here on the side. I don't know if everyone has the gra in the same place I do. Quotes that nin shahayu chaluk, meaning it happened essentially, right? So meaning the father died, the children had to split it up. They had a guardian, an apotropis, who chose, the child number one gets this portion, child two gets that portion. They split it all up. Higdilu, I take out the word im, but it's the same idea. When they grow up, yicholim limcho, they're allowed to go back to court and say, we got a really raw deal, right? This so-called guardian gave me the worst land, and I want to redivide my parents' position. So you can basically challenge it. Now, of course, court won't necessarily listen to you unless you can prove that you got a raw deal, right? It's not like you can just say it at a whim. But if you can demonstrate that it was unfair, you get a chance when you get older to be an adult to sort of get a second try. It says that's Rav Nachman says that. That's what Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel. I'm sorry. But Rav Nachman Didei Amar, Rav Nachman himself, right, who Rav Nachman was sort of the next generation, but he was his own very great Dayan in his own right. He said, Im higdilo einan yicholim limchol. That in fact, even when they grow up, there's no second chances. The Yistomim cannot question their division. The Imkain, because if they could, makoach beitin yafeh, then what would be the value of court? The whole value here is that you go to court, you do official proceedings, it's open to everybody, you hire all the best experts, and therefore it stands. Even if you can come back and demonstrate that they missed something, and they made a mistake, that they didn't realize that. Now again, what did they miss, right? So it could be that, let's say this orphan, this child, Reuven, we'll call him, inherited a different field from his mother that was right next to one of the fields that he didn't get, right? So he comes and says, I got a bad position because I would have had something close to me, right? So it wasn't unfair in value, but it was unfair in location, maybe, right? So says Rav Nachman, it doesn't matter. There's no backseas, right? This is where, is that really Rav Nachman's opinion? That you always go when a court does something, there's no second guessing? Me, Itlay, Rav Nachman, the quote, now we quote this very interestingly, Im Kain Makoch Beitin Yafed. Does Rav Nachman hold to the principle that if you second guess court, it will have no value? Atnan, what about the following Mishnah? Right? So the Mishnah in Ketubot talks about the case of Shuma Dayani, right? You basically, very interesting case, right? So a man borrows money, or a woman, I'm going to use man here, borrows money, right? And the man borrows money and he doesn't pay back, but his property is collateral for the loan, right? He doesn't show up. He moved off to Alaska. Court comes to his house and basically takes his property to pay off the malva, right? Pay off the loan. The guy comes back home and he says, what happened to all my baseball card collection, right? It's a great example. Not the one the Mishnah used, but it's a good example. What happened to my baseball card collection? And so they say, well, they sold it because you owed $10,000 to Ruvain. And so they sold it to pay back Ruvain. He goes crazy. He says, what do you mean? It was worth $20,000, right? They didn't get a good deal. They made the wrong value for my cards, right? So they didn't has to do what's called a shum. They have to do an assessment. But so this guy then goes to the professional appraisers who agree with him and say it's way off. The card's are worth $20,000, right? So they go to Reuven and say, you've got to pay him back. Reuven says, what do you mean? Court told me this is what I get. I didn't make the assessment myself, right? I did the assessment in with the court. So that's called Shum HaDayanim. So says the Mishnah, right, but just to point out, this really only applies if the Loveh is not there. Because if the guy is there and he agrees to it, he can't come back 2 years later and say, I disagree with the value. But the case is he's not there. He's away in Alaska, right? So court decides it. Says the Mishnah, Shum HaDayanim, Shepichatu shtut o tir shtut. They were off by more than a sixth, which is really a fifth, but let's just say more than a sixth. Then that's considered to be a major mistake, okay? Meaning, if there's a minor mistake, if you make less than a sixth mistake, then we say, that fluctuates. Things go up and down a little bit. But if you make a major mistake, you're off by more than a sixth, then you messed up. And then says the Mishnah, Micharan Batel, the sale or the transaction is canceled because it was a mistake. I paid too much or I got too much, it goes back and you start all over again, even though court did it. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, Micharan Kayam, that you have to enforce it because, and I'll quote the Mishnah, skip those lines, in Cain, Ma Koach Beitin Yafeh. Because if not, what would be the value of Beitin? The fact that it was done in court gives it legal authority, even if it turned out to be wrong. And on that Mishnah, said Rav Huna bar Chinina, Amar Rav Yochanan, halacha k'divrei chachamim. The halacha is like the chachamim that you do cancel the sale. So clearly, Rabbi Nachman does not say that just because you do it in court, it has permanent validity. This is where lo kasha. It's not a contradiction of Rav Nachman because, turn the page, hadid ta'u, hadid lo ta'u. It depends on whether they made a mistake or not, right? Meaning, in the case of the baseball cards I used, they were wrong. They just made a mistake. And everybody then says, according to Rav Nachman, that you have to cancel the sale, even though Beit Din approved it. But in the case of the Nachala, it's the case I gave you before. They split up the land properly, but they didn't realize circumstances that were different, right? That one son had a second field nearby, or one son had a dream that he was going to be a olive oil maker one day, and that field was good for olive oil, right? So he didn't take into account things that were not a mistake; they were unknown by Beit Din, and therefore it's not a ta'ut of Beit Din. Says well, if there's not a ta'ut of Beit Din, then what's wrong? That's what I said before. They can argue about the direction of the field, right? About I want it to be near another direction. I want it to be near another field that I own, or something like that. And there we say that they are not able to, according to the opinion of Rav Nachman, that makoch beitin yafeh. Continues the Gemara, a little bit off topic of Kiddushin, but it's the same topic of splitting things up and koach beitin. Second line, Amar Rav Nachman, ha'achim shechoku, right? You have brothers who get a Yerusha to them. Their father died and he owned 50 properties across Manhattan, and the brothers split them up, right? Says says Rav Nachman, the principle is it's as if they bought it from each other. What does that mean? That when you buy something from someone, remember, we're gonna have halachot in, you don't remember, but some remember. We're gonna have long halachot in Bava Metzia about ona'ah, right? About if you cheat someone. There's a prohibition in the Torah about cheating somebody, right? You can't sell, which is interesting, halacha, but you can't sell someone something and overcharge them, right? And if you do, the sale is batal and it goes back, you have to repay them. So what does overcharging mean? So we're going to learn all these halachot. A sixth is generally the number we're going to use a lot of shtut. But if you sell something to someone, then as we say right now, if it's pachot mishtut, meaning if the fraud, let's say, the disagreement is less than a sixth, then nikne mekach, it happens. If you agreed to split it, and then later you realize that there was a mistake, it doesn't matter, it doesn't go back. But if it's yeter al shtut, if it's more than a sixth, then batel mekach, the whole thing is negated, and you have to start all over and split the lands again. If it's exactly a shtut, then the halacha is kana, it works, you can't go back. Umachzir ona'ah, but the one who got the extra has to pay back the extra money that they gained through being, through cheating, basically, and taking extra property. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, now Hada Amaran, to clarify, when Rav Nachman said, Pachot mishtut nikne mekach, that less than a sixth, that if they have a transaction, right, so again, two brothers split up these 20 apartments in Manhattan, they then discover that, one of them got a raw deal, and he got a little bit less than the other, but it was less than a sixth difference, then it works, says Rav Nachman. Nikne mekach. Lo amran ad lo shav yishliach. That's only if you didn't say to either the brother, right, or a third party, let's make that person be in charge of distributing it, right? But if you assign that to a third party, you hired a shliach, and then it turned out that they made a mistake, and they gave one brother more than the other, then it cancels the whole thing. Because we can say, you didn't do your job, right? Avashavi shliach amar, you can say to that person, l'takuni shadartich v'lo la'avuti. I sent you to get a good deal for me, meaning to fix me up, to do it correctly, not to do it incorrectly. And since you did it incorrectly, you didn't do your job, and you're out of a job, and we start all over again. And continued Rava, furthermore, Hada Amara, and this that Rav Nachman said, Yeter Mishtut Batel Mekach, that if it's more than a sixth difference, if it turns out that when you look back at the apartments or the division of land, that it was more than a sixth, then it cancels the whole thing. Lo Amran Ella Lo Amar Lay. Oh, sorry. Lo Amran Ella Lo Amar. It's only if they didn't say, let's do it niflog b'shuma de beidina. Let's split it up with the court deciding what's worth what, right? We can't decide. But if the court decides, right, then we go with the court. And that's Avo Omar Niflag B'Shuma de Beidina. If you agree to go to court and do it, then Michran Kayam. Then even if it's more than a sixth, the Mecher is Kayam. Now, that's not, in fact, everybody agrees with that, but there is an opinion of that. It's not, as we just quoted a few minutes ago, right? In the Mishnah said, Shuma Dayanim, that when the court makes an assessment of value and splits it up, if they are Pichatu Shtut or Tirushtut, Michran Batel, but Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Amar Nichran Kayam, right? And Rashi points out, obviously we said before that we go like the Chachamim, but this opinion must be that we don't, that we go like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, that even though you made a mistake of more than a sixth, the fact that it was done by court means that the Mecher is Kayam, right? So that is the second detail, that even though Rav Nachman said that if you split it up and there was more than a sixth incorrect in it, you go back, you batel, that's only if you didn't do it in court. If you did it in court, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it would still be valid. And furthermore, the third point says Rava, Hada Amran, this that Rav Nachman said, if it's exactly a shtut, if it's exactly a sixth off, then you are kaneh, then the division stands. Umachzir onav, you got to pay back the extra amount. That's only Amran al b'metaltu. That's only true, which is why I kept switching back to cases by things that are movable, right? Let's say the father left, I don't know, 5 animals, right? Alva bin mekarka'i, but if you're talking about land, then the principle is ein ona'a likarkaot. There is never a halacha of karkaot, right? Meaning, excuse me, that in fact by karka, it's because it's fixed and it's a set value. If you don't do the right thing in karka, it goes back automatically. There's no concept of this extra 6 that goes on with karka, because karka essentially has a fixed value that is knowable, right? Because it's not moving, it's not as variable, and therefore there's no on'ah by karka. That's one explanation. There's of course other explanations of this, but that's one I'll go with. That there's no on'ah the karkaot, and says the Gemara ubim karka ilo amron, and it's true by karka. They only said that halachav on'ah does not apply. Ella the palig bi'iluye. It's only if you split it up by value, right? So you use the value, and therefore it's a fixed value, and whatever you agree on is what you agree on. Avaplug b'mishchata, if you split it up by the meshach, by the width or the space of it, right? Low that and what happens is that basically it turned out I said you get 2,000 feet and I get 2,000 feet, and then we go home and I go the next day and measure it, and lo and behold, my 2,000 feet is 1,900 feet, right? Which probably happens all the time, right? You say it's an acre and it turns out it's close to an acre, let's say, right? There, in fact, you do cancel the sale because it's basically just fraud, right? So if you are halig b'mishchata, if you split it up by size, then then you do say ona'ah, meaning you do cancel the sale if they get it wrong. Kidirabba, Damar Rabba, Kol davar shebemidah b'mishkal b'minyan. Anything that is easily quantified, you measure it, right? 6 apples, or you weigh it, 1 kilo, or you count it, then afilu pachot michtei ona'ah nami chozer. Even if it's less than the 6th, which is ona'ah, you have to go back on the sale. Meaning if I go to a store and say, I want to buy 12 apples, and they give me a bag and they give me 11 apples, and I get home, that's less than the 6th, right? But it's not considered to be ona'ah, and I keep it, and I have to just, etc. The sale is canceled. He didn't give me the number. And so by karka, if you split up karka by acres, let's say, then if it turns out that they cheated you a little bit and it was a little bit short, even if it's 5% or 2%, you can cancel the sale until they make you right, or you can redo it because it's not the proper shear. So that is a side point about ona'ah. Again, as I said, it's not exactly the exact message of today, But a side point about how ona'ah works, which is that it specifically works by metaltalin, right? Not by karka. But when I say it doesn't work by karka, that's only there's a lot of I read this all according to Rashi, by the way. Tosfos says a whole different take on all this, but that by karka it doesn't work if it's value, essentially, because since it's a fixed thing, you assign the value, right? But by measurements, there would be ona'ah even by karka. Okay, now we get back to shliach. Ready back to shliach? Says the Gemara, back to the question that we started with today and yesterday. How do we know shlucho shel adam kemoto, right? And so we proved it from marriage, or really divorce and marriage, and from truma, according to one opinion, not according to everybody, and by carbon pesach. Okay, says the Gemara, but we've got another proof. What about the following Mishnah? Right, there's an amazing Mishnah in Bava Kama which says something that seems to be very relevant to the question of shliach. Where's the Mishnah? We are exactly halfway through the daf, I would say. Haditznan. This that we learned in the Mishnah in Bava Kama. What does the Mishnah say? Hasholech et be'ero. Person sends off his torch, right? His fire. So you hand over a torch and you give it to cheresh shoteh v'katan. And you say, we're going to learn in Bava Kama the exact details of this, but presumably you say to that minor or deaf person who's unintelligent or shoteh, take this torch and maybe walk over to my friend's fields and see what happens. Okay. Now, what happens is that you burn your friend's fields down, right? But you're not responsible, says the Mishnah, because they're not your messenger. They're lav bardat. So says the Mishnah, patur midinei adam. We can't hold you liable in court. Again, it's a little more complicated. Right? Obviously, if you knew they were going to do it, it might be. Anyways, but you gave it to them. They did it based on you. You're patur midinei adam, but chayiv b'dinei shemayim. Right? God is not going to be pleased. Come Yom Kippur, you're going to have a lot to answer for about destroying somebody else's field. Okay, so that's the Mishnah, right? Says the Gemara. Continues the Mishnah. Shilach biyad pikeach, but if you give it to a intelligent or competent person, then, says the Mishnah, interestingly, pikeach chayav. Then that person who walked into the friend's field and burned down his field, friend, I should say, your neighbor's field, and burned down the field, is the one who's chayav. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Everyone likes this Mishnah so far? It sounds good. Ask me why. If you just gave me a principle from carbon pesach or marriage or whatever, that shlucho shel adam kemoto, I went over to a person and said, please bring this flame and deposit it in, my roommate, my neighbor's field. So why am I not chayav as the person who made the shliach? Right? Shlucho shel adam kemoto. Why is the person who took the torch chayav? Says the Gemara, amai. Right? Why is the pikeach chayav Nema shlucho shel adam kemoto? That's the Gemara. The answer that probably everybody is thinking about is shani hatam the ein shliach l'dvar avera. There's a limit. You cannot make a shliach to do an avera for you. And so even though the person says, sure, I'll be happy to help you out, I'll be happy to do it for you, right? I owe you a lot of favors. There's no shliach l'dvar avera. And therefore, the person's not your shliach. The person's acting on their own agency, and they are chayav for doing it. And what's the svara behind that? Damina, because we say, divrei Rav, divrei Talmid, divrei Mishomin, right? You've got the words of the Rav, meaning the words of God, and the words of God's student or another human being. Who do you listen to? You can't say, I was just doing what he told me to do. You've got to listen to the Torah if you know what it is. Otherwise, of course, it would be not your responsibility. Says the Gemara, Tanya, what about the fact that by Mi'ilah, now remember what Mi'ilah means is that you take something from Hektish and you use it for your own personal gain, right? Now, that unfortunately in those days, or maybe, I don't know, whatever, fortunately or not, used to happen more often, right? You would have money, you set it aside and said, I'm going to give this money to Hektish, okay? And you forgot about it, or you were sitting there waiting for you to go up to the Beit HaMikdash. And then one day you have to go to the store, right? You're going to whatever store we go to, and to buy bagels for Yom Kippur, right? For Motzei Yom Kippur, and you say to your child, right? Here's $20. Go to the store and buy bagels, right? Now it turns out that unknowns to you and to I'm going to get it ready from child. Let's say you say to your adult child, okay. So you say to a messenger, take this money. Now it turns out that $20 was the money that belonged to Hektish. And so by spending that $20 in the store, you've been chayav mi'ilah, right? So the question is, the Mishnah addresses, is who is chayav? Right? According to the principle of shlicho shel adam kimoto, the sender should be chayav. But according to the principle of ein shliach l'dvar avera, if mi'ilah is an avera, then the person should not be a shliach, right? And then the person who took the money should be chayav. Of course, they didn't know anything, but mi'ilah, remember, is b'shogeg, and they have to bring a carbon. So the Mishnah says the following. It's actually a Mishnah. Shliach shlo aseh shlichuto. Now let's say I sent the person to the store to buy me bagels, and they said the lox looked amazing, and they bought lox instead, right? So now they spent $20 of hektish money to buy something that I did not ask them to buy. So they didn't do their shlichut. So it says the Mishnah, shliach ma, then the shliach is chayav mi'ilah because they didn't do what I asked them to do. But if they did what I asked them to do, aseh shlichuto, then bal habayit ma'al. Then the Me'ilah Chiyuv is on the owner, the Baal Habayit, the one who gave the money. Ask the Gemara, why? I didn't realize it was an Avera, but in retrospect, it's an Avera, and Ein Shliach L'Dvar Avera. So how in the world can the one who sent the money or gave the money be Chayav? Says the Gemara, Shani Me'ilah Yalav Chet Chet Mitruma. Me'ilah is different because there's an extra pasuk by Me'ilah to tell you that just like by Truma, remember you can use a messenger. So too by Me'ilah you can use a messenger. Ma Truma mashvi shliach, af Me'ilah mashvi shliach. So too by Me'ilah you can make a shliach even to do an avera for you. So the same way you can make a shliach for Truma to do a mitzvah for you, you can do a shliach an avera through a shliach. Ask the Gemara v'neilach mina. So why don't we say that this uproots your whole principle of ein shliach l'dvar avera? If a pasuk tells you that by Me'ilah you can make a shliach, why can't you say you make a shliach by anything? Answers the Gemara, Misham Tavi Me'ilah u'shlichut yad shnei ktuvim habayim ke'achad. Because there are two specific examples where the Torah says you can make a shliach for an avera, and whenever the Torah says something twice, it's telling you only these two cases and nothing else. Kol shnei ktuvim habayim ke'achad ein melamdim. Wherever we have two psukim that tell you the same principle, it's telling you if we wanted you to do it, we would have told you. And so it only applies to those cases. Me'ilah hada amaran. What about shlichut yad? We have 2 minutes to do a little more. Thumbs up. Okay. Shlichut yad. What's the case of shlichut yad? Right, we're around 10 lines from the bottom. So remember, shlichut yad is talking about a case where you are a shliach, you are a messenger, right? And remember, not a messenger, a shliach, not a messenger, a shomer. Sorry, thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. You are a watchman, right? You are supposed to protect something for somebody else. So we're going to learn about all the responsibilities, but assuming I give someone something to watch for me and I don't pay them, they're a shomer china, right? So then they are responsible if they lose it or if it gets stolen, right? They are not responsible if an onus happens to that thing. And let's say someone's a shomer sachar, right? I'm paying them, so they're responsible if it's something frequent, if it's poshea, if like you leave it out in the rain or something, it gets ruined, but not if it's stolen or avad or lost, right? Now that's true as long as the shomer doesn't violate and start using the thing. But if I give the shomer my my computer to watch, right? He's supposed to just watch it. Once he opens it up and starts using it, all bets are off because that's called shlichut yad. He put his hand forward and took the thing. And once you do that, you basically accept all responsibility like a ganav, right? And if it's then lost in a hurricane or lost, which is onus, right? Or it's lost in any other way, then the shomer has to pay. Because once you are mishaleach yad, once you use the thing, you don't own it, but essentially you stole it and you have full responsibility, right? So the pasuk says that you're only patur im lo shalach yado in the thing of your friend, right? If you didn't start using it. So that's called shlichut yad. Now, let's say the case we're going to have, I'm speaking it all out because it's complicated. Let's say instead of me using the computer, I go to somebody else and say to my friend, why don't you go use that computer? So I have him use it for me, right? So I send a shliach to do shlichut yad on my behalf, right? So then the hurricane happens. Am I chayav for the loss of that object? So let's read that all inside. The Tanya, we have a bright that says al kol dvar pesha. right? That anything that you do wrong, meaning, and the pasuk continues, al shar, al chamar, al sat, etc. So then, what is that pasuk telling you? Whenever you do something wrong when you're watching it, you have to pay back. Beit Shammai omrim l'chayev al machshava k'maaseh. This is Beit Shammai, incredible halacha. It's to include that, let's say you decided, this guy gave you something to watch, right? You are not supposed to use it. Let's say he gave you a car to watch for, right? You're not supposed to use it, but you decide tonight, tomorrow I'm going to use the car to drive to shul, let's say, right? Doing a Avera. I'm going to use the car to drive to shul. During that night, the car gets stolen. Says Beit Shammai, you're already chayav for paying back that car. Because since you thought about taking it, even though you didn't touch the car, the machshava isn't enough. That's what al devar, kol devar pesha includes, even thinking about doing it wrong. You become chayav. Machshava k'maaseh. Betil Omrim says, no, that's ridiculous. You just had a bad thought. We don't punish you for that, or maybe we do, but not in this case. Shenemar im lo shalach yado, and said Beit Shammai to Beit Hillel, v'alo lo nemar al kol devar pesha. So what about the al devar pesha? It says if you didn't touch it. So that's touching it, not thinking about it. Amar Beit Shammai leBeit Hillel, 4 lines from the bottom. In Cain, al kol devar pesha lamali. What does al kol devar pesha mean? Says Beit Hillel, sheyahol, because I would have thought, ainli allahu. I only know if he uses the car. If you're amar la'avdo l'shlucho minayin, if a person says to his eved or shliach, use the car, minayin, that he also now is responsible if it then gets stolen. Amalomer al kol devar pesha. Therefore, it says al kol devar pesha, and that is telling you that even if you have a messenger, that you are then chayav to pay back the thing you're supposed to be watching. And so therefore, according to Beit Hillel, you now have shnei ketuvim habayim ke'achad, where a messenger can do something wrong on your behalf. One is mi'ilah, and one is when you're a shomer and they're doing what's called shlichut yad, and they're using the object on your behalf. And therefore, because you have shnei ketuvim habayim ke'achad, ein melamdim. I'll stop there, but the obvious next point is, what about Beit Shammai? Right? Beit Shammai disagrees and says you can't make a shliach for shlichut yad. So what is the source that you can't make a shliach in dvar avera? So I'll leave it there, 2 lines on the bottom. Wish everyone a Gemar Chatima Tova. Meaningful.
Thank you.
Gemar Tov. And we will hopefully learn again after Yom Kippur.
Thank you. Yasher Koach.
Thank you.
Yes, both of you.
Yeah.